Okay guys, this is the inking demo with the India ink. We've got the same drawing that I did during the penciling demo, and we're gonna ink on top of this. Now before we start, let me introduce some of the things that you're gonna need. Well, first of all, we have the bottle of India ink. Remember that India ink or Chinese ink is very permanent. If you get it on the clothes or on the carpet, it's a done deal. It's not gonna wash off. So be very careful with it. What you're going to be doing is, with the bottle, you're going to be using a couple of tools that are going to be dipped into the bottle periodically, every minute or so, which is, you get used to. It sounds like it's a lot of work, you know, dipping, making some marks, dipping, but after a while it's like breathing. You just get used to it. Alright, so what you're going to need is, well, what I'm going to demo with is, first of all, I'm going to show you how to use a brush. This is a sable brush, so it's kind of expensive, and it works very nicely with things like watercolor and ink. These right here, I told you guys about dip pens. Here are a couple of holders. So they're just plastic pieces with either a ring, like a groove around it, or a hole. Now, they're different sizes, and when you're using dip pens, you have to get the right holder for the right size dip pen or pen nib, right? So this one, for example, won't fit in this. It needs this one. This is the smaller one, is usually called a crow quill, because they get the name from, we talked about plumes and feathers, and that's how they used to write a couple hundred years ago. They get the name from that, from a crow's quill. And then this one would fit, let's say this one here. Okay, so we've got two dip pens. We've got a regular one, we've got a crow quill, and then we also have a sable brush. Okay, so now we're ready to, well, actually one more thing. We need a rag. The rag is just in case, you know, you need to get some extra ink off, or if you need to wipe the pens, you know, or if you've got a little bit of a spill, it's to, you know, to quickly take care of that. And it could be anything. This is a t-shirt. So alright, so I'm going to start. Everybody has a different inking style. I usually, if I use both kinds of dipping implements, in other words, the brush and the pen, I usually start with a brush, and the brush does a lot of the main lines, let's say around the face, and it also does a lot of the shadows too. Sometimes if your shadows are really, you know, big, you know, black areas, you might want to use a bigger brush to get it done quickly, right? But remember that the smaller brushes, especially sable brushes, will give you more precision. So that's the trade-off there. So how do we start? Now I'm kind of trying to negotiate around this tripod, so bear with me. Actually, I'll just cut across this way. Okay, so what I do is I dip the brush. I try not to dip it all the way to the metal part. The metal part's called the ferrule, because you don't want that India ink going inside and ruining the glue that sticks these hairs together, right? So I'm only dipping until about midway point. Some of the ink might still go up there, but it's not a lot. Not as if you were to bring in the whole brush, right? And so what I do is, with this kind of, I try to, as I told you guys in class, with brushes, the best way is to hold it straight up and down with the board, right? So perpendicular. It's kind of a strange position. It's not like your writing position, which is kind of at an angle, right? It's straight up and down. So straight up and down, you've got more control. So for example, I'm doing the outline to his head, and I'm controlling how thick or thin I want that stroke to be. So actually, I'm bringing the bottle of ink. I usually don't put the bottle of ink on top of the drawing, but I just so that, because the tripod's in the way, and I just need it a little bit closer so that this doesn't take half an hour instead of 10 minutes. So again, I just I go straight up and down, and I'm trying to control the thickness or thinness of the line. See, there I got thicker, here I got thinner, right? And so I do that for all the major lines. So a lot of the major lines are the outlines of the figure, right? Everybody has a different style too. So I have one style, and if you know, you look at comics, you're going to find other styles, you know, different styles of, you know, doing this. Another thing too that you want to make sure that you don't do is smudge the ink. So if I draw over here and then I bring my hand over and accidentally wipe across it, if the ink is still wet, it's going to smudge it and you're going to make a mistake, and then you're going to have to fix it somehow. So I'm trying to draw, where my hand doesn't, go over freshly made lines. Okay, and I'm doing it very quickly. This is not a good example of how good it could look, but I'm trying to give you an idea about the possibilities. So after I do these lines, let's say, you dip every once in a while. After I do these lines, let's say this is the t-shirt and his back. It looks a little shaky again because I've got this I'm kind of at a strange angle here. Wrinkle, another wrinkle. Okay, so I might even want to do the features. Now, it depends on how sharp your brush is. If you want to do, if it's a very important area like the face, like the eyes and the nose, then you might want to do it with a pen instead of a brush, because a brush requires a lot of practice. As I told you guys, it took me a few years to get used to, using a brush, up and down like this. So, as you can see, you can get some pretty nice lines with a brush. The cool thing about the brush too is that it gives you a looser line if you wanted that, and it also gives you a thick and thin line. So you can actually, for example, if I needed a thick and thin line, let's do it in the hair. So right over here. So it starts thin and it ends off very thick. You can also just start thin and finish thin, and you can also start thick and finish thin. So you got a lot of possibilities, right? You can also use it to blacken in areas, right? So maybe I want all of this black. Then I do use it, from the side here, because then I can use it to blacken in all of that very quickly, and then maybe fill in some of this stuff here. Okay, very quickly. And then the little white parts that I missed, I can always just fill those in with some smaller strokes, right? You get the idea. Now over here I told you about the highlights, that I wanted some parts to show some shine in his hair, right? So after I do this, let me just finish. I could follow along and leave some of those white lines. See, right there I just went over and I smudged this a little bit. No big deal, it's a small smudge, so it didn't mess up my drawing, and I can always fix it up a little bit, but sometimes you might get a very big smudge if you're not careful. So now I'm leaving some white lines in there to show that he has some parts of his hair are a little bit shinier. So the brush is also very fast. That's another good thing about the brush. It's faster and more versatile than the pen. Once you get really good at the brush, you might not even go back to the pen, because the brush can do basically all the same things the pen can do and more. But some people still like the pen. It's a different feeling, and it's a different, the lines are going to be slightly different. They're not as organic as the brush lines. They're a little bit more rigid. So, and it also depends on what kind of nib you put. So here I left some lines in the back to show that there's some highlights there. And if I were to continue, I would say, well, I'll put some dark parts here. Like I said, this is going to be dark. So, do some, these are the wrinkles, right, of the shirt. Maybe a couple more wrinkles there, a couple over here. And then, maybe some black here to show that, yes, this is a little bit darker. This area is darker than the top area where the light's coming from, right? Okay, So let's say I finish with the brush. Actually, I'm going to go into the features to show you that you can do the features with the brush. So here's the eye. The other eye. You know, the only disadvantage, as I said, with the brush is that it just takes practice. It's very, it's not easy at first. You'll find that you're almost like drawing with a big club, and you know you can't get any kind of accuracy. And again, like I said, it just takes practice. So okay, we got the nose and the features and the face and all that. Oh, the ear. We need the ear. So I'm just doing a really quick cartoon ear there. Okay, so once you finish with the brush, you're going to want to wash it quickly, because if not, if that ink stays on there, it dries on there, it's going to ruin your brush, and it won't be able to make this kind of this kind of point. See that point that it's got right now? It won't be able to do it again. So I'm not going to do that right now because I still need to show you the pen, but I'm going to spray it with a little bit of water to keep it wet so that it doesn't stiffen up on me. And then when I finish this video, I'm going to quickly run to the bathroom and wash it in the sink. Okay, so that's the brush. Now, here are the two dip pens. I'm only going to show you one. I want to show you the standard one. The Croquill gives you thinner lines. We don't really need thin lines here. Now what you do is, you dip the pen. Again, you don't want to dip it all the way to the plastic holder, because eventually you start to accumulate ink in there, and it'll be very difficult to take out the nib or to put in a new one. So you want to only go up to, let's say, that line there. You see that line that this thing has? And that's it. You don't want to dip it all the way in and have that ink go inside the groove. A lot of times when the pen nib is new, this one's kind of new, it's going to have an oily film over it. So what you have to do for the ink to take, now you notice I dipped it 3 times and it didn't get black, right? You have to wipe it with your rag. That's what the rag's for too. So, and now notice that it is black. Okay, so now as opposed to a brush, I told you the brush, you hold it up like this, right? The pen is actually at an angle. You can't hold it up and down like that. So it's actually kind of nice because it's already showing, you're already using it just like how you would use, you know, as if you were writing, right? And so with a pen, you can do lines. You know, this is called hatching. I think I talked about this in class. You can make lines here too. Now to make them parallel like that, it just takes a little bit of practice. But notice that I'm only using my fingers. With the brush, I was trying to use my arm. It's an arm movement. With the pen, you're usually going to use your wrist or your fingers. Okay? And a lot of times with the pen, you're going to... let me bring the thing over here now. Just so that... A lot of times with the pen, you're going to be making little lines. You could make little lines. You see that? So I'm following the lines that I drew with the pencils, right? The pencil lines, just to make that kind of shadow. Now we can also do a little bit of cross hatching. So here I'm gonna hatch in a different direction, up and down, let's say, as opposed to, you know, diagonal like that. And then maybe up here I'll do it again, and see how they crisscross? That's cross hatching. Makes things a little bit darker, and it gives a different direction, different feeling too. So you can go in different directions. I went, you know, diagonally. I did up and down. Here's horizontal, right? And then in the other direction, actually, I got to move over here around the tripod. The other direction, I can go this way, the other diagonal, right? So there's a lot of directions that you can do. That's one thing the pen can do. Now, can the pen do what the brush does? Yes, up until a certain point. It doesn't have the flexibility of a brush, right? But I can make thick lines with the pen too if I, instead of going left to right like this, notice that I'm going left to right, I go up and down, and then I open up the valve a little bit, and it gives me a thicker line than these lines. So it gives you a little bit of a flexible line. And sometimes I just ran out of ink, I gotta dip it again, and then maybe try to follow that line again. Okay, so yes, it could do that. Now, last week I showed you guys the marker demo, right? And it didn't really give you a good idea about the chisel effect the chisel of the marker, the chiseled marker that I showed you. I showed you a couple of markers. One of them had that chisel tip, right? Now, I'm gonna, see, I just took out this and I wiped it. After you finish with the pen, you don't really have to wash it like a brush with soap and water. You don't have to do that at all. All you have to do is wipe it. Wipe off the excess ink. Some of it stays on and that's fine. It's not gonna ruin the, it's just steel nibs, right? So it's not gonna ruin it or anything. This is a lettering nib. Okay, and you can tell because it's got the brass thing on the back. The drawing ones don't have that. The drawing ones are just one color. This one has two colors. It's a silvery color and the brass color. And so it also gives you the strange, you know, instead of it being sharp, it has like a plate. Now we talked about, you know, in the old days they had, they used to use reed pens, right? So this is kind of following that idea of a reed pen. You know, so, and this will do a much better mark than the marker did. Now I'm wiping it just like it did with the drawing pen because it's the same problem. A new pen usually has oils in it, right, that prevent the ink from adhering to it, right? So here I'm going to dip into this and see it's all black now and it's ready to go. So I didn't letter anything, but I just wanted to show you a better rendition of lettering than I did with the markers. So with this kind of pen, if it's angled, let's say this way, diagonally, cutting across this way, right, I can actually do the thick and thin lines, right, from lettering. When we were doing calligraphy, we talked about that, but you see that? It's actually quite nice, and it gives you a lot more control. I'm running out of ink. It gives you a lot more control than a marker, and that's the big advantage. Another big advantage is that the ink you're using is India ink, Chinese ink, and that's much better than marker ink. It lasts a lot longer and it's just much better. So, oops, this one's still new, so it's still a little, yeah, it's another thing about these things is you have to break them in a little bit. Sometimes they don't work when they're new. These are all new, by the way. When they're new, they you know, it takes a few uses for you to break it in and for it to be able to work, you know, to your, you know, to work right. So again, you see that? That's actually quite nice. Now, as I told you guys before, I'm not a really good letterer, but you could see what possibilities you can get with this kind of pen. Let me show you a better example. I have another example that I did for another class, another cartooning class a year ago. And it also has, you know, letters. So here, just to give you an idea about, actually these are just marks down here with a pen or a you know, a brush. But up here you see the letters, right? You see the, you know, the different things you can do with this kind of pen. Okay, so again, I don't. You're probably going to be using markers, you know, but in the future, if you are interested in using India ink, you know, these are some possibilities. You know, as far as the two major ones, again, are, you know, the dip pen, either the crow quill or the regular one, and then of course the brush, sable brush or something similar to a sable, something that maybe is not as expensive, because this brush here, for example, would cost maybe $25 today, and this is a little one. A bigger one would be, I don't know, maybe 50, 60, 75 bucks, maybe more than that. So it could be quite expensive. Anyway, that's that for inking. See you next time.